This is one of those poems that I loved even before I started teaching. And it's incredible that Christina Rossetti wrote this at 18 because it has such a deep understanding of the complexity of human emotion around death and how we want to be remembered. And in that sense, its three main themes are death, love, and memory. Death, because this is a poem about how someone wants to be remembered when they die. Memory, because this is a poem about how someone wants to be remembered when they die. And love, because the way they want to be remembered when they die is keenly tied in with love. They want to be remembered because that would say something about the fact that they were loved and therefore remembered. But also at the same time, the reason they're willing to be forgotten is because they love and they don't want their loved ones to be sad and grieve after they have died. On death, we're going to see Rossetti acknowledging the sort of finality and inevitability of death and the impact that death has on those left behind. On love, we're going to see the selflessness of love, the way that someone can be like, it's okay to forget me. If that makes you sad, I would rather you were happy and forgot about me. But also there is still a desire to be remembered by your loved ones. And then this is also tied up with memory because we see on the one hand how we as human beings value remembrance and see that as being really important, but at the same time how it can be okay to move on as well. So the three themes are very intermingled. Essentially, if you're talking about one of them, you're talking about the others as well. It's not really possible to separate death, love, and memory in this poem. So with all of that in mind, let's get stuck into the actual language and structure of the poem. Usually, I always like to talk about language before structure because I think language is where the meat of meaning is, and then structure reinforces that. However, I think that for this particular poem, the structure helps us with understanding the sort of tone that's sort of lying underneath the words. So I want to talk about that first. And what I want to talk about is the fact that this is a Petrarchan sonnet. Now, my first test is, can I get the spelling of Petrarchan correct? Because I never remember the second R. A Petrarchan sonnet, don't worry too much about why is it called that. Essentially, there was a guy called Petrarch. What is significant about the structure that he uses, though, it's always 14 lines, and it essentially has two parts to it. An octave and a sestet. Octave being the first 8 lines, and a sestet being the final 6 lines. And in Petrarchan sonnets, the aim of the octave, so this is not just about the poem, remember, this is any Petrarchan sonnet you ever come across. The octave is always about setting out a problem, while the sestet is about the solution. So when Rossetti is talking about the fact that she wants to be remembered when she dies, we shouldn't really view that as her making like a command, even though it's going to be a lot of imperatives of remember me. But actually, because it's in an octave, which is about setting out a problem, think of it more as her like an underlying acknowledgement of the conflict of what she's saying. Like, she is making a request of remember me, but the structure means she's also sort of acknowledging that that's not a straightforward thing that she's requesting. There is a challenge, there is an issue to what she's requesting. When we get into the language, we can think a bit more about what is that problem, what is that challenge that she is suggesting there is to wanting to be remembered by your loved ones. And then when we are going to reach our sestet, where she's offering the solution, the shift between those two is called a volta. So this sort of change here is called a volta. Now, in the case of remember, the volta is that she's going to shift from remember me to I'd rather you forgot about me and were happy. So, and again, we'll get more into this as we go through the language. In that sense, if the solution is forget me to be happy, then the implied problem to remember me is her understanding of how painful that can be for our loved ones. Now, usually in a Petrarchan sonnet, the rhyme scheme And don't write this down because she's about to break it. So you can write down the way she breaks it, but don't write down this rhyme scheme I'm about to write down. Usually the rhyme scheme goes A, B, B, A, B, B, A for the octave. And then for the sestet, C, D, E, C, D, E, or C, D, C, C, D, C, D, D, C, D, which I appreciate all those different letters can just make your head spin a little bit, which is why I don't need you to remember that or write that down. I just need to know she doesn't follow that. She follows it for the octave. She rhymes the first 8 lines A, B, B, A, B, B, A. So you've got away and stay rhyming, and you've got land and hand rhyming. Then you have day and pray rhyming, and you have planned and understand rhyming. When it comes to the sestet though, she follows a slightly different rhyme scheme. She goes while and smile, grieve and leave, and had and sad. So she goes C, D, D, E, C, E. Why on earth would she do that? Why would she choose to break the rhyme scheme? And I can hear him in the back. I can hear the chorus of, 'cause she felt like it. But think about it this way. If you've gone through all the effort of following a traditional poetic structure, if you've gone through the hard work and effort of keeping it to 14 lines, of making it have an octave and a sestet, of making it have a volta, of making the octave rhyme A, B, B, A, B, B, A, only someone who is chaotic would suddenly be like, you know what? Just for the sake of it, and for no other reason than that, I'm not going to follow the rhyme scheme of the last 6 lines. So there's got to be a reason. She would not just, on that final step, choose to not follow it for no reason. To explain my reason, I've got to jump back to the original rhyme scheme for a second. I think about why would a poet choose to use one of those 2 rhyme schemes. So if we take C, D, E, C, D, E, there's a repetition, 3 lines following the exact same pattern. And a poet might use that in order to create a sense of repetitive order. You've then got C, D, C, D, C, D. Now, it's not a direct repetition, but there is an interweaving because D appears in both and C appears in both. So it creates a sort of, intertwining effect between them. However, with Rossetti's sestet, C, D, D, E, C, E, there is a separation. D does not appear again. E wasn't in there earlier. And C is the tiny little bit that repeats. And it's so far apart, like the lines while and smile as you're reading the poem are so far apart, it's, to be honest, easy to completely miss it. And you don't even really experience it as a rhyme because they're so far apart from each other. And that, I think, is completely on purpose and fits with the point that she's trying to make about death and memory, right? Because this rhyme scheme, the way that she's changed this rhyme scheme, is a physical representation, a physical symbol of the act of forgetting something, of losing something and moving on to something different. Because she moved on from a CDD rhyme scheme to an ECE, and the C's still, it's there, but it's not the core, it's not the rhyme. The DD is the rhyme you notice in grieve and leave. The EE is the rhyme you notice. And the C is like a minor thread. So we could say that this entire change she does in the sestet is symbolic to the point that she's trying to make of it's okay to forget, it's okay to move on. Because neither of those rhyme schemes in the original Petrarchan sonnet would really support that feeling. They are both about something continuing, about something being interwoven. And they don't really work for that. So she changed it and she made it work for the message of her poem. A final thing I just want to note about the structure of this poem is that Petrarchan sonnets typically are used for love poetry. Obviously, this is a poem that appears on its surface to just be about death. But of course, by making it a love poem, using a structure that's commonly used for love poems, she is managing to subtly communicate through the structure that this is as much a poem about love as it is death. The structure of this poem is incredibly important in reinforcing the ideas that the language are going to communicate as well. And I think it's really clever the way she's built that into the very subtle fabrics of the poem, into the rhyme scheme, into the structure, into just even the choice of form that she's gone for, because that is what the sonnet is. It's the form of poetry that she's gone for. So let's get into the language of this poem. Now, obviously it's called Remember, and we see this imperative of remember me being repeated multiple times throughout the poem. But what's important to remember about remember is that it's not being, the tone behind it, right? Because it's not being said in a you will remember me kind of way. It's, if anything, if we think about what we've already said about the structure of it and the themes of love and their desire to be remembered and the fact that she's setting out a problem, it's almost, I would go like a sort of pleading. And I think that comes across when we see how she then goes on to describe death itself, because she says, when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land. So that choice of language of gone away is euphemistic. I mean, so is silent land. It's all euphemistic in how it talks about death. In particular, she uses more of an idea of a journey, because it's like she's travelled somewhere, she's travelled to this silent land. And she also repeats the phrase, I am gone away, gone far away. So we have this anadiplosis as well. That anadiplosis is when you repeat a word or phrase at the end. You had it first at the end of one line and then you repeat it at the start of the next line. So that's what she does here. Now I've just laid out a whole bunch of different terminology there. So what is the significance of all of that terminology? Well, in choosing to go for a journey and then re-stressing, gone away, gone far away, because of course she doesn't repeat word for word, she adds the word far. She's really emphasizing the distance. She's using journey because if you think about it as not just a euphemism but as a metaphor, we can better understand as human beings. We only experience death once and we can't tell anybody about it, but we can all experience a long journey, and so we can better comprehend that concept of somebody being gone really far away from us. And all the feelings that can come from that when your loved one travels really far away from you. The longing for them, the missing them, the wishing they could be with you. And of course, all of those feelings that can exist when someone we love goes on a long journey can also be true when someone we love dies as well, often is true. What's interesting about is both a euphemism and metaphor to say the silent land. It is a metaphor, but she's also using a metaphor in order to be euphemistic, so she doesn't have to say when I am dead. What's interesting about that image of the silent land is the different ways you could interpret it. The silence could have connotations of peace, calm, because of the quietness, but it can also be eerie, mysterious, something sort of like unknowable, and feel frightening in that sense that it's what is silent. It is you are silent in that land. So that feeling of never being heard of again, never speaking again, and so on. So it's a euphemism. It's referring to the fact that, sounds obvious to say out loud, but when we die, we can no longer talk to the people that we love. So it could be seen as reinforcing that image of the lost, or it could be seen as reminding us that, their connection with each other will be lost for good. In that sense, I think I'm all for those of you who want to make a case for the calm, peaceful image, go for it in the comments. I personally am leaning towards more of a here's why death is scary image. And death is scary because of losing you and never being able to talk to you again. And in particular, what's scary about it is that word when I am gone away. Because when has a guarantee to it. When reminds us of the inevitability. She is going to die. It's not if I go away, it's when I go away. So in that sense, the fearful image of death is that combination of not getting to be with the people you love anymore. There is a distance that you are never going to be able to close again. And also the fact that that's going to happen. So that is why I say the imperative of remember me has the pleading tone, because it's like, if this scary thing has to happen, and this is our problem of the octave, this scary thing has to happen to me, I have to die, and I'm scared. So what comforts me in that thought is that you're going to remember me. My loved ones will remember me. I think there's such a beautifully sad feeling behind this opening, because it's someone who is simultaneously accepting the inevitability of death, even though it's scary, and at the same time attempting to have a kind of control over it by getting their loved ones to remember them. And we see that as it goes through the next lines as well. When you can no more hold me by the hand, nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. Holding someone by the hand, again, I'm going to be making a fairly obvious statement here. Holding someone by the hand symbolizes the intimate connection between them. For the record, I do think this poem is speaking to, which reminds me of another technique, apostrophe. This poem is speaking to someone in particular. That's what apostrophe means, not the punctuation mark, even though that is also an apostrophe. And I think the speaker of this poem is specifically speaking to a romantic love. And I'll come back in a second to why I think it's a romantic love, because we're going to see that in the next lines. Anyway, hold me by the hand symbolizes that intimate connection. And then you have this, nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. Now, students sometimes struggle to get their head around the grammar of that, because she's using a kind of archaic language, because she is Victorian. However, it's super straightforward. Let's imagine we've got two lovers. Okay, boyfriend and girlfriend, and they have to say goodbye because, you know, they've got to go their own separate ways for whatever reasons. They're holding hands, they're saying goodbye, and then let's say the girl turns away to go, and then she turns back and is like, oh wait, one more kiss. So it's that, like, I half turn to go, I prepare to leave you, and then I change my mind and I turn back and I stay with you. And what this symbolizes is the fact that when we are alive, we can control our lives, and we can control how much we get to be with the people that we love. We can, instead of leaving, choose to stay. And so that therefore contrasts our gone far away into the silent land, where we have to go. And when we go, we don't get to come back. The first two lines about death contrast what her experience of her romantic relationship when she's alive, that she has control over things. And she's saying, essentially, when I am dead, you're not going to be able to do that anymore. We aren't going to be able to do that anymore. You aren't going to be able to have that physical connection with me, and I'm not going to get to choose to stay with you. I have no control over it. The poem then says, remember me when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you planned. So this is why I think the person speaking is speaking to someone they love in a romantic fashion. Because typically, if you're planning a future with someone, I mean, maybe some people are just really close to their parents and plan their future with their parents, but by and large, I think if you're planning your future with someone, it's a romantic relationship, and it's, you know, it's the old, shall we get married? Shall we have kids? That kind of planning. When the speaker says the day by day, I think what that phrase symbolizes is like routine in their lives. Day by day, it's this creating this feeling of, you know, we have a pattern together in our relationship, and therefore when you die, you lose that. You lose those little routines, those little habits that you have together. And in the case of this relationship, one of the things they have is that they talk about their future. Now, modern readers might pick up on the fact that it's you tell me of our future that you planned. and they might get a little bit, indignant of, excuse me, why are you planning our future on your own? So I'm just going to take a quick sidestep to explain why I think the grammar is that way. This is Christina Rossetti writing in the 19th century. If her speaker is female, speaking to a male partner, because again, we're dealing with 19th century, it's overwhelmingly most likely heteronormative. It's also most likely operating in a gender dynamic whereby her husband is going to be the one that plans their future. Her partner is going to be the one who decides when he becomes her husband. He will be the one proposing. He is most likely the one who will decide where they will live, what they will do, how many kids they will have, etc., etc., etc. And we can get into a whole modern debate on the acceptability of that, but that's not relevant here. I don't think Rossetti is even conscious she's using that kind of language, because that is just such the status quo of the time that she's living in. Of course, it is natural to say your husband's planning your future. So that's why I think the grammar is you planned. That being said, I still think the fact that she uses the plural in our future shows that there is a unity between them. There is a connection between them. And the future obviously symbolizes hopes, dreams, goals that when you die are no more. And I think sometimes young people interpret that as suggesting that our speaker is going to die young, because there is a future that they've planned that's going to go unfulfilled, like perhaps marriage or having children. But I kind of take that interpretation with a pinch of salt of like young people assuming that once you're past 30, you don't have a future to plan anymore, so you might as well just roll over and die. And that's not the case. Even 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds can plan their future with their partner and think about, even if it's as small as, are we going to go to Tesco tomorrow? There is a planning, there is a future people do for their lives at every age. So I don't take this to imply that the speaker of this poem is dying young. I just take it to imply that the speaker of the poem sees their entire life with this loved one. And therefore, one of the things that they are sad about death, is losing that routine of what they have together, the day by day, and also losing that excitement of what could be. Because when you die, there is no could be anymore. You're gone. And talking about having a future that you've planned is also interesting if we think about the link between that and the turning to go yet stay. It's another example of the ways in which we humans have control over our lives when we are alive. We can plan our future, we can choose to stay with the person that we love, but we do not have that control when we die. Now this next phrase, only remember me, the adverb of only is really powerful because it intensifies this person's pleading tone of like they so badly want to be remembered by their loved ones that is all they want them to do. And that again is, if we think about the octave as setting out a problem, implicit behind that structure is the speaker understanding that what they're asking for here is unrealistic, is asking a lot of their loved one to only remember me. So we can think of this octave as like the desperate pleading of what you want to happen from an almost a kind of sense of selfishness of, I have no control over this, it's inevitable, and I'm going to lose you, and that terrifies me, and I don't want that to happen, but at the very least, just remember me. And then maybe the act of remembering me can make it, feel like I'm not gone or something. Whereas then what they're going to acknowledge in the sestet is more of a reality of actually the I love you, and what matters is not so much that you remember me, but that you are happy. So the problem here is that sort of almost selfish instinct of the human being to just want to be remembered. And then the sestet solution is actually the selflessness of love. So the octave is the sort of selfish desire. The solution is to be selfless. And she says next, you understand it will be late to counsel then and pray. In other words, it's a repetition of what we've seen with that lack of control, in the counsel and pray is like the partner trying to do something about it. They symbolize trying to take action. So the words to counsel means to advise somebody on what to do. And then to pray, obviously, is about communicating with a higher power, most likely in this case, the Christian God, because we're dealing with Rossetti and we're dealing with the 19th century. To counsel and then to pray, what those two verbs symbolize is the loved one that's been left behind trying to take action by either they themselves doing something, counselling, or by trying to get someone else to do something. Praying to God, most likely with the request, please bring back my loved one, or please don't let them die or something, right? Because actually, in fact, the fact that she's saying it's too late, the point is you can only do those things really before someone has died. She's saying, essentially, there's nothing you're going to be able to do. So the verbs symbolize trying to take action to control things, and the fact that it's too late represents that human beings cannot stop death, we cannot do anything about it. We then have our volta, so things are now going to flip 180, right? I've already said we've just had our octave of setting out the problem of her selfish desire of just wanting to be remembered because she's so afraid of losing the person that she loves so permanently. And then now the solution, she's going to go through that. Actually, I love you, and therefore you being happy is more important. And that is exactly what she says. She says, if you should forget me for a while and afterwards remember, do not grieve. So she's still using imperatives, but the key difference about this imperative, while remember me had that pleading tone to it, do not grieve has more of a comforting tone to it. They are trying to be there for their loved one now and, tell them it's okay. So it's a very significant shift in tone between our octave and our sestet, from being about the self to being focused on the loved one and trying to comfort them. And she says, for if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts that once I had. So let me just translate that for a second. So the darkness and corruption is another euphemism for death. And what's significant about this euphemism for death is it still has within it as an unpleasant and fearful an image as the silent land. If anything, in fact, more so. Darkness and corruption is a more explicitly scary, fearful image because of darkness and its classic symbolic meanings of the unknowable, but also perhaps with dark and black and being like nefarious and scary, the scariness of the dark. And then corruption is referring to the corruption of like the physical body, the decay of the physical body, the destruction of the self. Actually, when you think about it, it's a way worse, way scarier than the silent land. So the fact that she's using an even more frightening metaphor for death at this point, when she is also telling her partner, do not grieve, and I want you to forget me, it's okay. That's interesting because it shows how selfless she is being. She still has the fear is of death, the fear of if anything is stronger and more powerful, and yet still the more important thing is the partner and them being okay. And her point about death is if it leaves a vestige of the thoughts that once I had. So vestige is like the traces, the tiny little remains of something that is disappearing. So she's saying if death leaves a tiny, tiny little trace of who I once was, the thoughts that once I had, and so thoughts symbolizes who she was, essentially acknowledging that if I am nearly entirely forgotten, it's better by far you should forget and smile than that you should remember and be sad. We've obviously got the antithesis going on here with forget versus remember and smile versus sad. And an interesting flipping, because you usually associate remembering something with making you happy, forgetting something with making you sad, but she flips it in order to raise the point that it's better to forget and be happy. So this sestet is pretty darn clear in its messaging of how our speaker has changed their view and changed it to realise that being remembered is not the most important thing. And it's the impact the death has on the loved one that's more important, and making sure that they are okay in the future.